Hi everyone. The topic of this lesson is race. Refer to pages 5 and 6 in your second study guide, and chapter 9 in your text will also provide you some useful information. Let's start with the basic question of what exactly is race? The term itself is often considered related to biological differences or characteristics. That is, it's supposed to refer to genetically transmitted traits or differences. And although it's true that we humans differ in a number of ways which involve physical traits, race itself comes into being only when the members of a society decide some physical traits actually matter. In short, race is a social and cultural creation. It refers to a category of people linked together by shared and selected history, ancestors, and or physical features. I guess the key word in my statement would be selected. In other words, being assigned a race attaches social significance to certain features believed to be characteristic of those people. So you can almost make the argument in the end, race can be whatever anyone wants it to be. But therein lies part of the problem. And I've highlighted specifically some problems with a biological notion of race at the bottom of the 5th and at the top of the 6th page of your second study guide. Let's take a look at number 1. No great surprise in a lot of respects to some observers that what was selected, what physical traits, to serve as a basis for classifications of race. One of the first real attempts at classifying race was undertaken by this gentleman, Johann Blumenbach. He classified humanity into one of 5 races, and he linked it to a great extent on, surprise, surprise, a highly visible physical trait, skin color. So he noted some folks being Caucasian, white, some Mongoloid, yellow. Malayan referred to anybody of brown skin. Ethiopian referred to anybody with very dark complected skin, black. And then finally those with red tinted skin, American, to be precise, American Indian. So his was a more or less trait-based approach, focusing on the physical feature of skin color. Another researcher, early researcher, who tackled the same issue, this gentleman, concentrated on geographic origin or location. And notice he classified humanity not so much on physical characteristics, but on where they were located and their national character. And some of this is rather interesting. Notice he not only came up with classifications, but he also provided certain key characteristics of their national character. And probably no great surprise, he being a European, notice how he classified anybody of European origin: active, clever, inventive, and ruled by laws. Now, going back to what we see here, when you consider all of the traits that could be used to describe race, those that have been employed are more often not the most visible. Now, researchers will often point out the fact that the most important biological differences among people, that's the ones that are going to impact health, longevity, and susceptibility to illness, are invisible. And they don't play any really important role when it comes to the definition of categories of race. These are going to include such things as blood types and also the presence of genetic markers which might predispose some people to certain diseases. Now when I think about it, I'm not overly surprised that early European attempts to classify race based upon highly physical traits or features was created in the first place. Most Western cultures, like all cultures, provide their members with what's called a worldview, a perception of reality, if you wish. And it's interesting that Western cultures, and this is true to a degree with respect to other cultures, all cultures, when it comes to their worldview, will tend to emphasize one of the physical senses at the expense of the other. Western cultures tend to place a whole lot of emphasis on sight. As a matter of fact, you might think about your own life for just a moment. Have you ever been in a situation where you had difficulty comprehending? And you might have made the observation, I just can't see what you're getting at. On the other hand, when you did fully understand the point being made, you might have yelled out, "Hey, I see what you mean!" Likewise, we often refer to imagination in the context of sight. We talk about in the mind's eye. And even when we greet and leave take, in our particular culture, we often employ sight-related language. See you later. Oh, it's so good to see you again. So with that said, it doesn't surprise me at all in a lot of ways that these early Western attempts to come up with race were going to focus on something that was very obvious and highly visible: skin color. Now look at the second point, and this continues on over at the top of the 6th page. Existing racial classifications are very narrow. As a matter of fact, genetic variation expressed in one's outward or external appearance constitutes only about 0.1% of that person's genetic code. These don't really predict anything about the person's biological makeup. When you start applying elements like blood type, facial type, and other physical attributes, including skin color, all vary more within the categories known as races than between or among them. So you want to remember, as I have noted, again drawing from the research of several other social scientists and analysts, bear in mind that physical variation is going to occur along a continuum. But then look at number 3. There is this notion that there's a common origin for people who appear to be of the same race. Take a moment to focus on these photographs. If you look carefully, these folks do resemble one another to a degree. This is an indigenous member of the population of Australia, and these are inhabitants of Africa. Now, although they outwardly resemble one another in skin color and in some facial features, they're not linked physically. And you may be aware of the fact that some peoples in southern Asia have skin tones. They're complected as darkly as some Africans, but they have other physical characteristics that resemble white Europeans or North Americans. So it's best to be cautious when we come to the notion of race. So one of the other things I want you to highlight, go back again to the 6th page of your study guide, and note 4 other factors that I have included here, making again race in a lot of respects something that's socially and culturally created. Take a look at the first one. The way people interpret physical differences makes race important socially as well as culturally. Race rankings and relationships are affected by people's beliefs, not necessarily by scientific facts or evidence. Perceptions or notions as to what is a race does impact the lives of people by shaping or influencing how they think, behave, and interact with others. Now, if you look at the second point and give some consideration to it as well, different societies develop different kinds of racial classifications. A good example of this is Brazil. The Brazilian government officially recognizes 5 races. one relating to white, another to brown, another to black, another to yellow, and the final one undeclared or mixed. Yet in some places in Brazil, you will find communities that recognize upwards to 40 all the way to 100 distinct races. And from 1910 to 1940, the U.S. Census employed the racial category of Hindu to refer to or describe Southern Asian Indians. Now look at number 3. Race classifications are going to reflect the specific traits used. In traditional China, for a very long period of time, body hair was used to distinguish race. There are some people in Japan who consider the Brukomin, the modern descendants of categories of people once engaged in low-level occupations, as a separate race. Yet they are biologically indistinguishable from the rest of the population. Today, they are the descendants of folks who were put in a lowest ranked caste back during the Edo period, 1603 to 1867. These folks violated expectations as well as certain Buddhist principles by dealing with things that were dead. So they were the leather tanners, the undertakers, the butchers, the executioners. And because they had to deal with dead things, they were considered to be repulsive. And although discrimination to these folks is not as great as it was in the past, it still remains. Likewise, if you look at that last point, racial classifications do vary over time. And there's a lot of interesting examples of this, both in a direct and an indirect way. Even today, there are still people who consider anyone of Jewish ancestry to be that of a different race. And in 1900, those of Irish, Italian, or Jewish ancestry were often officially classified as non-white. That designation didn't officially change until 1950. And likewise, it's kind of interesting, in certain parts of Brazil, one's race can change based upon that person's income and wealth. The idea of accumulating great wealth, is thought of as, quote unquote, whitening a person. Yet a very darkly complected Brazilian who is quite wealthy, who flies to the United States and decides to live here, is most likely going to be viewed by the majority of Americans as black or as African American. So bear in mind again, it's the way people interpret physical differences that make race so important socially and culturally. So in the end, we got to ask another question. Why do societies make so much of race? Well, some researchers argue that such categories allow societies to rank or arrange people in a hierarchy, giving some at the top more money, power, prestige, and other valued resources. A second factor that may figure into why societies make so much of race, it allows some to feel or believe that they are somehow better or superior to others. Bear in mind that race can become very significant, and as a result, societies may create really extreme race-based classifications or categories. For example, in the United States, there was once considered, very important, the hypodescent rule. A child of a mixed marriage would be assigned as his or her race classification that of the lowest rank or subordinate category of the two parents. And to take it one step further, one could be classified as black if one parent was considered to be in any form or manner black. And to take it to an extreme, one might be labeled black with as little as 1/32nd percent of African ancestry. That is, if it could be determined one had one great-great-great-great-grandparent, that would end up classifying this person as black. Also, the U.S. Census included a category known as mulatto. 1850, 1860, 1870, and then again in 1890, and then again in 1910. And it meant, and by the way, I forgot, it was included also in the census of 1920. That meant one mixed parent and one white parent. We'll pick up next time by analyzing ethnicities and minorities.